Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Ante Delia of not knowing Snapchats don't disappear like Chris D'Elia, the William Gomez of all my homies. Hate William Gomez. Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC France, Skirmish on the Seine, or the night that the fighting nerds fell, and the rise of Team Aspinall. Honestly, this card sometimes finish doesn't mean that much because you can manufacture that by making a load of mismatches. It's what they're currently trying to do on Dana White's Contender Series. And it's what Scott Coker always did at Bellator and Strikeforce before that. But this one had some decent matchups with a load of great finishes that just happened to happen. Only 2 fights went the distance on a 13-fight card. Those 2 fights were the main event between 2 very well-matched elite middleweights. And William Gomez's boring ass being boring. But let's talk about... Should we do the main event first and then we'll get into all the good finishes? Main event was Nassourdine Imavov versus Caio Borralho. This one played out similar to the sort of thing I expected. I thought maybe Imavov would try and use his wrestling a little bit more. But Borralho was playing with the boxing in his last one against Jared Cannonier, but has mainly been sort of an in-and-out karate-style point fighter. Imavov has always been Mr. 1-2. What I did love in this one was that Imavov was using some really nice little counter combinations, just 2 punches most of the time, but sometimes 3. It's going to be a theme today, counter with combinations. He had this beautiful one. He was orthodox, Borralho was southpaw. When Borralho jabbed, Borralho has a really good jab, he would slip to the inside of it, which is, can be even more dangerous in an open stance matchup between a southpaw and an orthodox, because you're not just going into their power hand. The different distance often means that you're going into like their rear leg as well. Guys love to throw a southpaw left straight and throw up a half-assed high kick just behind it to catch you leaning. But Imavov did a great job of slipping to the inside of that jab and returning with the right hand to the body, either a right uppercut or a right hook to the body off his rear hand. Really lovely, and then he followed with the left hook upstairs. Terrific combination. And sometimes he'd do the same thing, but with a right uppercut to the head and then a left hook afterwards. But it was a really nice little counter combination. It was working so well for him. And what I noticed was that I didn't think this was a 5-0 fight. I didn't think this was a 50-45 performance. Obviously, it's judged round by round, so you could get there. But I felt like 5th round, Caio did better. 1st round was pretty even. I think you have to be pretty swayed by the crowd to think Imavov got all 5. But a lot of Imavov's success, I feel, because if you looked at the stats, they were actually pretty even throughout. A lot of Imavov's success seemed to be answering Caio Borralho back. Every time Caio landed something, he would throw 2 punches back. And maybe he'd only land 1, but he sort of stole the visual on that exchange. Whereas when he went at Caio didn't really come... Well, his corner was saying he doesn't have counters. And that's not strictly true, because what Caio Borralho loves doing is intercepting counters, which is where you throw the left straight or the left knee as the other guy stepping in, or the left elbow, as a southpaw this is. You intercept him stepping in. You're countering the step. So everything he does can be countered in like one way. The counters that Imavov's team were talking about were coming back with counters. If you hit Caio Borralho, he basically goes, "Oh, I don't like that," and moves back. The way that Imavov was slipping to the inside of the jab did mean that Caio Borralho could have threatened the high kick a bit more. Not the most effective thing in the world, because it's a slightly different distance to where you're going to step forward to throw your left straight. He hit him with a couple of nice 1-2s, because he has that great 1-2 that shoots down the inside of the opponent's lead hand. And you could tell, like, there were a couple of occasions where Imavov got caught, didn't throw the counter back, and he just shook his head going like, "No, it didn't hurt me." And obviously it rattled him enough that he forgot to throw back, or was out of position to throw back, because he was doing such a good job of it generally. But Borralho opened with the left high kick in the very first round, and then he sort of forgot about it for most of the fight. And then in the 5th round, he starts throwing the left high kick again. And that's standing Imavov up. That's saying, don't duck your head down to that side, because I'm throwing up this high kick every now and again. And you can't really count on seeing it when you're mid-slip. And that's when Borralho started hitting with 1-2s. He did a great little fake with he picked up his left knee, stepped through and threw a 1-2 from orthodox, and then hit him with another 1-2 when he went back to southpaw. If you watch this fight, you'll remember that Imavov caught Izzy on the switch. He fought Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya switches stances all the time. If you switch stances in front of someone, a really good time for them to hit you is just as you're establishing your new stance, just before your brain's caught up to what you're supposed to be doing, especially if you're really erratic with it. And of course, I'm always saying switch stances in motion. Do it while you're circling out to the side. If you bring your feet back to level, circle around the opponent, and as they're turning, you decide which foot's going to be in front. You're never at risk of being hit there. Whereas if you change stances right in front of someone, Danny Jacobs versus Gennady Golovkin's always the example I give, because Danny Jacobs was doing really well, giving like prime Gennady Golovkin a lot of problems. And then Golovkin got a 10-8 round just by waiting on the switch and then hitting him. But Imavov caught Izzy on the switch for the knockout in their fight. In this one, every time Caio Borralho switched stances in front of him, he hit him pretty clean. And then in the fifth round, once Caio had thrown the high kick a couple of times, he faked it, stepped through, hit him twice from the new stance. And then he did the same thing and stepped through and threw a calf kick from closed stance. So he stepped through to orthodox after faking the left kick, and then threw a right low kick that caught Imavov flush. I said coming into this one, Imavov has trouble with calf kicks. He's eaten quite a lot of them in the past and not really done anything about it. It's not so much that he was like hobbling. It wasn't like Harry Hardwick earlier in the night where he took a couple and he went, oh, that's jarred his knee. He's not the same fighter now. You're watching him hobble towards the guy. But it was like, if you keep taking those, even if they're not hurting you, let's pretend that they don't hurt at all and your stiff upper lip is convincing. If you take a calf kick clean and every time it turns you around slightly, you can't come back with punches off that. So it's a free hit that you then can't retaliate on. So it is something I'd like to see Imavov address. But as I was saying, Caio Borralho seldom changes stances. He only does it to calf kick against orthodox opponents. And he doesn't have a step-up calf kick, which I think is the most important thing. I was talking about making like a little skill set thing of just the basics that every MMA fighter needs. You need to be able to calf kick off both legs against both legs, or at least from your basic stance off both legs. Because the number of guys who will pound in calf kicks on an orthodox opponent from orthodox, so right leg going into their left leg over and over again, and then the opponent will change stances, maybe because the calf kick was working so well, they have to put that leg in the back. And then the other guy's like, oh, I can't calf kick him now. Whereas if you watch someone like Alex Pereira or earlier on this card, Cowie Fernandez, when their opponent changes stances, they don't change stances to match them. They just step up and kick with their lead leg, which is a slower movement. So you got to be really good at it to get away with it because you're doing an extra step. Kopylov, very good at it. Most people in the UFC even, absolutely terrible at this. You change stances on them and they're like, I can't calf kick anymore. And for Borralho, it's really obvious because he's a southpaw. So he faces, the majority of the time, orthodox opponents. So like 8 times out of 10, he's locked out of calf kicking unless he changes stances. And it might seem like a point to not, it might seem like I'm banging on this and you're going like, well, he probably couldn't have knocked him out with calf kicks. But the whole thing is, if you establish a good calf kick or the threat of a good calf kick, the guy has to check them or pull his leg back. He has to take defensive reactions that put him at risk of you leaping in and punching him in the face. Where if he's allowed to just stand in a boxing stance the entire time, you're not going to punch him in the face. Except when he makes errors. If he's as good as Imavov, this is. And then the other letdown, of course, was the Borralho wrestling, which we all sort of knew about because we watched him against Abbas Magomedov. He shoots this big double leg with his head on the outside, and that's his basically his only shot. And he does it from so far out, and he does it bending forward at the waist. And if the other guy pulls his lead leg back to square, as I was talking about with Hossein Keita, who I was very excited to see on this card, and then he fucking ruined it. But yeah, if you do that, if you bring your feet back to level and sprawl, very hard to make good on that shot. It was only in like round 4 he decided to pick up a single with the head on the inside, which I liked. It was interesting watching Imavov here because he was doing a lot of sprawling or getting on the back of Borralho's head and going to the front headlock. And then Borralho would come up into a clinch, and I was watching it going, I don't like doing this thing where everyone is immediately going after every middleweight fight. I just don't see anyone beating Khamzat for a long time. And it's like, we've seen so little of Khamzat Chimaev that's very easy to think, but the more you see of someone, the more you understand and the more everyone seems human. But watching him just sort of like sprawl and grab the front headlock, that's the sort of stuff that Hamzat Chimaev loves to just drive through and push you into the fence. If you watch Hamzat's shots on like Usman and well, to a degree Whittaker, but some of the better opponents he's fought, it's basically like he shoots real low and then he does the prowler. He's just pushing the sled towards the fence. So yeah, that'll be intriguing. That takedown defense matched up against Hamzat's uh, type of takedowns. There was this one and another one on the card that I really felt like, because Borralho, once he saw Imavov slipping, he was trying to step in and land elbows, and that is a good read. One of the things that you'll see some really good, like golden age Nakmoy do is jab, lead elbow, and then jab, cross, rear elbow. And you do the punch, and you step on the punches, and then you step again on the elbow. So it's really, especially with the right hand into right elbow, it's really unnatural feeling. So for Borralho, it'd be jab with the right hand because he's southpaw, left straight, step again, left elbow, without really pulling back all the way. Very tricky, sort of nuanced movement. The mechanics are really weird to get a handle on, but very good for these sort of occasions when guys are slipping your left hand. If you can just slide that elbow across their face, got a good chance of cutting them or hurting them, properly. Normally, those sort of punch elbows or punch elbow off the same side techniques work very well against people who are covering up. But if you've got a guy slipping the same way every time, you can give him the punch and let him slip it and say, right, here's an elbow or a knee or a high kick on the same side. He wasn't doing any of those to really follow up on it. He was just throwing ones and ones twos, which is kind of Borralho's MO. Not a big combination worker. Anyway, main event was decent. Imavov got the win. It's loads of eye poking still, and a couple of groin kicks. In France, if you're French, you can cheat for free, basically, because I'm going to moan about Gomez later, but I've struggling to think of times I've seen a guy throw a punch with his fist clenched and then open his fingers as the hand gets to the eyes and extend them. Just so obviously trying to poke the guy in the eye and then get a nice break. But co-main was Benoit Saint-Denis versus Mauricio Ruffi, or Huffy, whatever we're calling him. Yeah, I mean, this was actually, I was told just after my podcast last week, Benoit Saint-Denis has moved to work with, is it Nicholas Ott, or Otter, who is, he's Imavov's coach now that Imavov has left Fernand Lopez, and he's also coaching Gomez. So he's got good fighters under him, and they're quite measured fighters too. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, is that the best? Because as I'm always saying about fighters like Benoit Saint-Denis, such a physical force. Yes, he got hurt doing the charging forward and trying to overwhelm the guy. But then if he sits back and doesn't do that, is it even more obvious how sort of limited his skill set is? And anytime you've got someone who isn't just a textbook fighter and you send them to a coach who produces textbook fighters, you often run the risk of losing the magic. I just think of Prince Nazim going to Emmanuel Stewart. Obviously one of the great coaches of all time in boxing, but he didn't have a clue what to do with Naz. What are you going to do in the course of 6 months? Make him into a standard textbook boxer? No. And with Benoit Saint-Denis, so much of his effectiveness was in the overwhelming pressure. And if you're worried about getting hit while applying pressure, you can't really apply the pressure very well a lot of the time. But honestly, I was really impressed with this one. The things he's always had are a massive southpaw left kick and Hulk strength and a decent left straight and left overhand. But that's all you need. I mean, Mirko Krokop was just a left kick and a left straight. That southpaw double attack gives you so much for not so little investment, but in terms of like number of things you have to learn to apply it effectively, not that many. And there aren't enough grapplers in MMA who use high kicks. It's a really useful weapon to have in the tank, especially if you are a wrestler. Colby Covington had great success throwing left high kick into a shot. Because if you're the wrestler, you're probably the best prepared in MMA to have your leg caught and work out of it. And if the opponent is worried about your wrestling, they're almost going to take the kicks off the table themselves. Go and watch Ankalaev Pereira. See how many low kicks Pereira throws. Never gets taken down in that fight. Or maybe he did for a couple of seconds, I can't remember. But like the wrestling did not play a big role, but it did loom large because so much of Alex Pereira's success in recent years has been calf kicking, and he did almost none of it against Ankalaev. So Benoit Saint Denis being able to throw the high kicks with impunity while Ruffy or any other striker he's fighting has to think about, like, is it worth throwing the kick right now? I am risking him grabbing my leg or just bulldozing through on my standing leg. And so that was the game plan for this fight. It was very similar to what he's always done. It was a little bit more measured, but left high kick into left straight or left high kick into shot. And the shots didn't come off a lot of the time. The first one, I think he shot, Ruffy sprawled, and he just came up on the body lock from his knees and ran him into the fence, which is, a very physical thing to do. But his takedowns off the fence were great. Body lock looked fantastic. When he got Ruffy down in the first round, he was in butterfly guard, and he started stepping over in like a body lock pass where you step over the knee into a half butterfly guard or a half guard if they take their other foot out. But a lot of the time when you try and do that, the opponent will they'll get their elbow and knee together and they'll be stopping you from stepping over the top of their knee. And Saint Denis just pushed his bicep down and stepped over his arm, and it was like putting himself into a sweep. But then he grabbed the head and the underhook and just sort of floated over the guard. It's something I'm going to try because it looks chaotic, but it worked out really well for him. It's things like that and the butterfly sweep against Frivola that you see this guy's sort of knack for this because he's had like 5 years training or something like that. He's very young in terms of training age, but he's really got a knack for finding positions on the ground. But then you saw him against Moicano and he got just completely overwhelmed. Moicano, a much more like traditional sort of style of grappler. And anytime they got back to the feet, Ruffy looked a little bit tentative. Saint Denis wouldn't hang around long. He'd go high kick straight on the arm. If Ruffy ever gets caught out of position, it doesn't just make you have to block. It makes you reluctant to start moving your hands and punching because you might just get domed while your hand's away from your head. And if you're getting kicked in the arm all the time, you're off balance anyway. If you go watch any great kicker in Muay Thai, particularly southpaws, any southpaw with a great left leg in Muay Thai, they love, or actually there's plenty of orthodox fighters with a great right leg like Singdam, they love throwing their kick at the arm and they put their body into it enough that when they hit a block, the guy still sort of stumbles. Might not be like a running across the ring and hitting the rope stumble, but you watch the kick lift them out of their stance slightly. And as the leg comes back, the other guy is in no position. He has to get his weight back on. He has to get his weight back on his feet and then come back at you. And that split second is enough that you can kick them for free and get away with it. So high kicks onto the arms, really effective just for freezing people. And in Muay Thai, obviously, you get points for landing the kick on the arm and they wouldn't get back at you. But in MMA, you get to lift that guy out of his stance slightly and then shoot on his hips. Or step in with the left straight. Eventually, Saint Denis got on his back, got his face in his bicep and squeezed it until Ruffy tapped. It was a good performance from Benoit Saint Denis. He did look, I would say, like his demeanor looked like he was quite worried about getting hit, but the way that he applied the pressure was still effective. And literally, the left high kick is such a weapon for him. I've been saying this since before the Dustin Poirier fight. It's so hard to get back on someone if they land a hard kick on your arm. And if they land a hard kick on your ribs or your head, obviously you've got massive problems. But his issues in like the Poirier fight were that he just started swinging, got on top of Poirier and started swinging. And it's like, yeah, that's the stuff that's going to get you exposed for your lack of slick mechanics. The left high kick goes largely unpunished because it is so hard to punish if you throw it with some venom. And the threat of you dropping on their hips is always there. Modestus Bukakas versus Paul Craig. Do you know what? Good on Modestus Bukakas. He's on a 4-fight win streak, and this guy used to be sort of like a punchline. Not the best competition. I mean, actually, Sakura was 11-1, which is pretty impressive, but not the best competition. This was sort of classic modern Paul Craig. He's got the exciting guard, he's got the cool submissions and stuff, but the thing is, if you don't make a mistake and you just stay tight on top of him, bottom position still absolutely sucks in MMA because you can turn over elbows in a short space. And then if they start getting tired, you can turn over bigger elbows and start hurting them. We've known this since like Ken Shamrock versus Royce Gracie 2, where Ken Shamrock had lost the first fight by submission, just scrambling around and getting wild. And then in the second fight, Gracie pulls guard because he can't take Ken Shamrock down because Ken Shamrock can actually wrestle and is like 70 pounds heavier than him. And Shamrock just puts his hands on Gracie's biceps and headbutts him for 40 minutes. And he never hurts him enough to like be in danger of stopping him. But that's how easy it is to shut down the guard. Keep your hands inside. Don't let them, it's not that it's easy to shut down the guard. It's that so much work needs to be done from the guard to create openings against good opponents if they're not just like recklessly opening up. And you'll see guys like Charles Oliveira, they're a bit reckless in the way they open up. They'll dig under the leg, throw up a wild armbar attempt in anticipation of you pulling your arm out and then rolling to their knees or whatever. He does stuff to make stuff happen. Whereas Paul Craig does stuff to try and get a triangle or try and get a submission. Charles Oliveira's massive success off his back comes from the fact that he is attacking the whole time, but he does not give a shit if he gets the submission or if he gets up to his feet. He plays a ton of guard because he ends up in the guard a lot. He doesn't play a ton of guard because that's how he's going to win. So when you see Paul Craig, I mean, obviously he's had no takedowns forever either. Like there are these fights where he's shooting takedowns and just shredding his knees on the mat, which ghastly visual of his knees weeping and him still not being able to achieve a takedown. Yeah, not a whole lot to talk about in this fight, just classic Paul Craig. I mean, I do like him a lot. I like when he wins, you're like, damn, that was slick. Like the Mirlock from half guard into the triangle against Jamal Hill, the last second triangle against Ankalaev. Some of the stuff he's pulled off, amazing. It's always been really fun to watch him when he's on, but the chin was always an issue. The way that the chin is always up in the air was always an issue. The fact that he was never able to develop wrestling. And the fact that by the end of his run, you could say, if that person is a competent grappler, they will sit on top of him and batter him from the position he wants to be in, like Brendan Allen. But this elbow was incredible. It sliced Paul Craig's ear like someone had taken a razor to it. Gave a great post-fight speech, very classy. He said the young eat the old in this sport. And I was like, but Modestas Bukakas has been around forever. And then I looked it up and Paul Craig's like 37 and Modestas Bukakas is only 31. So he's been doing this 10 years already. So good for him. And this was one of a couple of guys on this card who are now training with the Aspinalls, who are about to become the new fighting nerds. They just have a rash of success. But it's him and Ante Delia, big lads, because they need big bodies. I knew that Delia was there with them because there was a really good YouTube video on Aspinall's channel. I don't know how I ended up watching it, but it was him, his dad basically explaining that like from very early on, they realized that being the biggest lad in the gym was not going to help you that much. I mean, I think that's why so many MMA heavyweights just fold the moment they feel adversity, because they're in the gym with smaller men. Like even if you try your hard, even if you're trying your hardest and you're tiring yourself out and you're doing the best work you can, you're still probably only working with like light heavyweights, middleweights, because there just aren't that many proper heavyweights around. So Aspinall's dad has got this sparring day together where all these heavyweights from across Europe meet up and get rounds in. So you've got, and even like just England, you've got Aspinall, Parkin, Boudet, Phil DeFree, the KSW champion, and Delia, who obviously won the PFL tournament a while ago. So he has $1 million. And he's living in Wigan. Do you know how many everything that'll get you in Wigan? Wigan, really interesting, because bringing some combat sports back to Wigan is interesting, because Wigan is where the Snake Pit, the great catch wrestling gym, was. And that was responsible for a lot of the Japanese pro wrestling stuff. It had some influence on American wrestling. It's a very peculiar thing that wrestling was enormous in Wigan for a while, and they were producing some of the best wrestlers in the world. And then England just forgot about wrestling altogether. We just don't care about it. And it was people from all across the British Empire. There was Indian Kushti wrestlers turning up and stuff. Karl Gotch trained there, obviously German. That's not part of the British Empire, but yeah, Wigan's an interesting town to try and build a combat sports career out of. But while we're on the subject, Ante Delia smoked Marcin Tybura. Obviously, Tybura, I want to say long in the tooth, but he's 39, which is not that old at heavyweight. He has been doing this forever, but he just beat Mick Parkin, teammate of Tom Aspinall. I don't enjoy watching him. No one does, but yeah, Delia, for a heavyweight, he's got some fast hands. Really just sort of like spazzing out in combination, but it worked well. Umar C versus Branson Ribeiro. I'd heard a ton about Umar C. Um, his performance in Intouchables was phenomenal. No, I'd heard a ton about this guy. And then I watched him. I was like, really? Awkward reaching, striking, and then the double legs along the fence, just diving out. Almost got kneed in the head on the second one. And then he got turned off top position with a Kimura too, where I thought that was where he's supposed to dominate from. But I mean, he did finish the guy in the first round. I was just looking at it going, really? I don't rate Brenson Ribeiro that highly. And you struggled there. William Gomez versus Robert Ruchala. Ruchala, one of several European MMA champions who were on this card. And I think it's interesting comparing someone like, comparing Gomez and Ruchala. Oh no, Gomez has won a title in Leroy de Fight, apparently. But we've got Harry Hardwick came in as a Cage Warriors champion. His brother George Hardwick was a Cage Warriors champion when he lost on the Contender Series. So there's this sort of like trying to say, oh, Cage Warriors not what it used to be. I mean, Mason Jones is on this card, and he came through Cage Warriors as a phenomenon. Looked bad in the UFC, went back to Cage Warriors, came back to the UFC again, and he's actually doing all right now. But it's quite interesting that some of these guys don't get regional titles, and they just come to the UFC, and they seem to be doing better. So someone like Sam Patterson, was picked up pretty early by the UFC, and I've watched his fights since he first came to the UFC, and I was like, he's all right. I'm not super impressed by him until recently. But someone had an eye on him and said, yeah, he's good. And, he was nowhere near like a Cage Warriors title or a Brave CF. Oh, he had a few fights in Brave CF, so maybe he'd have won their title in the next fight. But it just goes to show you, like, regional titles, they mean as much as they mean. I mean, they mean that you hung around in the regional promotion long enough and kept winning and got sort of ignored by the big dogs, which is a shame. But Robert Ruchala was the KSW featherweight champion. Lost it to Panase and then won it back again when Panase went back up to lightweight. This was quite interesting because I've been talking about that fight with Panase on the Boycast previewing this. And I was saying, like, Panase battered him. Panase, he's fought for belts at 3 weights in KSW. The UFC wouldn't give him any money. They basically said, come through the Contender Series. And he said, I'm getting $500,000 at KSW. So he is KSW's big star. And he's really putting in the work because he's a lightweight. He went down to featherweight to prove that he could cut more weight, like without being adversely affected. Beat up Ruchala and won that belt. Went up to welterweight and lost a close decision there. If you've not seen Saladin Panase, go and watch him because William Gomez did a good job in this one, making exploiting Ruchala's wildness and difficulty closing the distance. Panase put him on the back foot and battered him and barely let him touch him aside from getting clipped in the first round. And then he finished him with a body kick on the ground, which if you like your Khalil Roundtree, that's probably why. But Gomez, I joked about. I said I hate him in I said I hate him in the preview, and I said I hate him in the intro to this episode. But he's good. I do watch him and go, yeah, talented man. It's just that he has these fights like the Joe Anderson Brito fight, very slow, won a controversial decision, and then his one finish in the UFC was a groin kick that the referee just couldn't admit was a groin kick. Like they're showing you the replay of it bouncing off this dude's cup, and he's like, well, I've stopped the fight, so it's got to be a TKO now. UFC run. Boring majority decision. Boring split decision. TKO, groin kick called as body kick. Boring split decision. And then Haider Emil fought him last time. He had a fun split decision loss. And then he fought Robert Ruchala, and to be fair, Ruchala got a good fight out of him. He's exactly what people get mad about Leon Edwards, Lerone Murphy, me with Valentina Shevchenko. Great understanding of distance, lands a sizzling body kick every now and again. Looks like he could do more. Looks like if he just pushed it a little bit, he could get finishes. He could be impressive. And cheats a bunch too. Like, splayed fingers into the eyes was wild. I will say Ruchala, kind of exactly like the Saladin Panase fight. He realizes he's not going to get to this guy, so he starts throwing these weird long combinations, or not long, but traveling combinations. Against Panassi, he got put against the fence, and Panassi would pull and counter everything he lashed out with. So what he started doing was throwing the first punch and falling through into a spinning elbow or a spinning back kick. And he caught Panassi a couple of times. So then Panassi had to go, okay, right, retreat from the first strike, duck the second strike, take advantage then. Do not try and pull counter on the first strike, or you're going to get hit with a back fist or a back elbow or a back kick. So there were loads of occasions in this fight where he was like throwing a kick, falling short because Gomez has pulled his lead leg away or whatever, or just faded slightly. And then as Gomez is about to come back in, Richella hits him with a back kick. It's not a very powerful back kick, but he does get him and moves him backwards. Got on top on the ground for a bit. It was a competitive fight. Gomez probably deserved the win. Eye poke sort of ruined it for all of us. And another thing about the Leon Edwards comparison, because in the clinch, Gomez actually beats people up with knees and elbows. It was really fun to watch him work in the clinch, which is part why this fight was actually quite enjoyable, because Richala was pushing to the clinch over and over again, and then Gomez would have to make space, hit him with a couple of elbows, hit him with a knee. There was a bit where Gomez had double underhooks and Richella was pushing him into the fence and had both overhooks and his hands pressed together into Gomez's cup. I think it's just the case that featherweight has a few decent contenders coming up, and there's a lot of fighters there. There's a lot of established names. If Movsar Evloev can't get a title shot off like 8 wins in a row in the UFC, pretty convincingly, most of them, obvious next contender, and they're not going to give him it. What chance does William Gomez have if he's scraping split decisions over people and his one finish was a dick kick? You got to think about, like, how am I going to get this title shot in a division where, I'm sorry, Volkanovski fans, I'm a Volkanovski fan, but they seem to be trying to keep Volkanovski with the belt for a little while, try and get him some safer matchups, or at least prevent the belt from falling to Movsar box office poison Evloev. What else we got? My boy, Harry Hardwick. Oh, very sad. Came up on 4 days' notice, up in weight. Short notice against Caio Fernandez, who actually looks like a killer. These low kicks, man. If you've watched Hardwick on Cage Warriors, what he does is he pressures people, he stance switches, he hits the body loads. He does a ton of things that are really fun to watch and good technical striking. But man, the thing about calf kicks I was talking about in the main event, I'll talk about it always, any good low kick. There are calf kicks that like put your foot to sleep because they hit that weird nerve. They dim muck you. So think of Henry Cejudo versus DJ, or what's a really good one? Jamie Varner versus James Krause. His foot just goes to sleep and he keeps standing up and falling over because his foot's like flopping around underneath him. And it doesn't look like he's about to collapse in pain. It looks like his foot's gone to sleep. But if you take a kick on the outside of the leg, above the knee, below the knee, either, and it jars the knee, those are the ones that really hurt. And they're the ones that you don't walk off, because Henry Cejudo gutted it out and his foot came back into action later in the fight. Once you get your knee jarred, you're sort of standing in that like trodden on a Lego brick stance where you can't quite put your weight down. It completely ruins your whole game, basically, because you can't shoot takedowns, you can't move effectively, you can't transfer your weight onto punches and kicks. Basically, everything you do offensively and defensively is hampered the moment that one of your legs is compromised. And you can sort of like put that leg in the back, you can change stances, and then you're making the best of a bad situation. But as soon as they start pounding that other leg, you can't, you get one chance to switch stances to save your leg. You can't switch again. You've only got the 2 legs. So Hardwick's lead leg was out of action from like 30 seconds in, switch stances, and just gets pounded again. And I will say, Caio Fernandez, not only hugely powerful kicks, which in itself is a bravery thing, because you've got to be fine kicking a check. And one day you'll kick a check and maybe your shin will break. Like, that's just how it happens. So to go naked low kicks with that much confidence is really impressive. But also, that's part of why the calf kick is so strong as a lead. You try and kick them in the thigh, they pick up their leg, you kick the hardest part of their shin or their knee, and you break your leg. If you try and kick them in the calf and they pick their leg up, you're kicking their ankle that's flapping in the air. You're going to go straight through that a lot of the time. But yeah, Caio Fernandez, the most important part of this fight for me was that he can calf kick off both legs. As in, when Hardwick changed stances, he couldn't do the straight calf, he couldn't do just calf kick with his rear leg off the bat. He had to do a step-up calf kick, and he did it. And it worked because he actually can attack the legs off both sides. There are good low kickers who are just hampered when you switch stances. It's crazy. Because that's what you want. You want to kick the guy's leg enough that he has to stand in the wrong stance. So poor old Harry, he got his shit pushed in. But this is one of those foot in the door fights. You know, if you take a fight up a weight class at 4 days' notice, you're not expected to do well. But they will give him another fight at his own weight, which is, you know, it bypasses the trouble that his brother had getting into the UFC, where you have to go through the Contender Series. And there are plenty of examples of people coming into the UFC at short notice, looking terrible, having a horrible time in their first fight, and then making good on it later on. Melky Costa is a good one. I mean, Benoit Saint-Denis on this card. His first fight in the UFC came in at short notice, up in weight against Zaleski dos Santos. That was the one that that weird referee just let him absorb a horrible beating in. He lost that fight, and then he went on a 5-fight winning streak at his natural weight and got, you know, to what could have been a number one contender fight against Dustin Poirier, and that was supposed to be Fares Ziam, or Ziam rather, in there with Fernandez. Which honestly, I said before this fight that I was like, oh, it's a bit of a stay busy fight for Fares Ziam because he should be doing bigger things than this at this point. I felt like he should have been fighting someone at least ranked. But honestly, looking at Cowie Fernandez, I'm like, actually, ooh, that would have been a hard fight. But then that's the thing, you know, in the UFC lightweight division, there are lots of hard fights that don't advance your career that much. You probably, if you're on a 5-fight winning streak and you just made Mike Davis look terrible in your last one, you probably want to be fighting someone who will move you closer to a title shot rather than a monster who isn't ranked. But that's the KSW and the Cage Warriors champions on this card. The other one was that there was the Octagon featherweight and lightweight champion, Hussein Keita, coming in to fight Pitbull Frere. People were telling me this wasn't short notice, but Pitbull and Hussein Keita have both said that it was relatively short notice. I think they had like 6 weeks to prepare or something like that. But missed weight by 3 pounds. Pitbull rightly said, no, I'm not taking that fight. And then Hussein Keita came back and tried to put the blame on Pitbull for not taking the fight. If you miss weight by 3 pounds, it's not that you've missed weight by 3 pounds. There's a decent chance that you are even bigger than that suggests. Missing weight by 3 pounds suggests that you were like aiming for the weight and you just missed it. If you missed weight by 3 pounds, you could have been aiming to miss weight by 3 pounds, eating that percentage of your purse and just come in massive and beat the dude senseless in your first UFC fight. Was it Charles Oliveira or Cowboy Oliveira he came in 7 pounds over against Will Brooks? And Will Brooks said, yeah, I'll take the fight. I want to make a good impression in the UFC. Got battered. And then the UFC don't give a shit if your opponent missed weight. That doesn't factor in the record. It's whether you lost. So good on Pitbull Frere, because they don't seem to like him. And he's trying to get as many fights in as possible to sort of like bump up his numbers and get an even more lucrative contract as fast as possible, which is good because he's old now. But I was really looking forward to that fight, and I even wrote a piece about Hussein Keita in the week on the Patreon, and then he fucked it all up. But then if you look back at it, this fight was at featherweight. He went down to featherweight 3 years ago, then came back up to lightweight in Octagon. So if you haven't made featherweight in 3 years, maybe don't count on it at relatively short notice for your big entrance to the UFC. I doubt they've cut him. He's still a good fighter that they wanted. So I imagine they'll just either he'll sort it out and they'll have a fight at featherweight, and if he misses weight, then he's going to be out. But there's a decent chance that he goes up to lightweight again. He's a very interesting fighter. I do think he's very flawed or like limited as a fighter. I think Pitbull had a good chance of showing up a young prospect who was supposed to eat him, but we didn't get it. So why am I still talking about it? Sam Patterson versus Trey Waters. I was really impressed by Sam Patterson here. He's normally gigantic against his opponents because he's a welterweight, but he's 6'3". He's fighting a dude who's 6'5" at welterweight. I was like, I didn't know they stacked welterweight to that high. Boxing looked sharp, and then a lovely V-stepping jab in and back to the left. And as he came out, Trey Waters had thrown a counter, was off balance, and Patterson just came back in with a left hook right straight, knocked him silly, got a TKO on the feet. Yeah, thought it was good. Patterson looked great. Or Violent James Acaster, as I call him. Someone said he looked like he just defended his village in the 13th century or something like that. Defended his monastery in the 13th century. Yeah. British fighters, him and Paddy, don't have time to get proper haircuts. But yeah, seems down to earth. He's on a 4-fight winning streak, a 4-fight stoppage streak. So we'll see where that goes. Robert Brycek versus Brad Tavares was a real surprise because I watched Brycek get basically schooled by Ihor Pottiera, who is not like a super slick fighter. Ihor Pottiera, I think he went 1-5 in the UFC. Oh no, he beat Shogun as well, so he went 2-6 in the UFC, and I think he was finished in all but one loss. But he made Brycek look like trash, and that was Brycek fresh in off his very successful Octagon run. But I'll have to go back and revisit that Pottiera fight because I remember him doing lots of movement and sort of leading Brycek around the ring. This one, he walked Brad Tavares to the fence and he banged him with like 4-punch combinations for the first round. Dig into the body, looked great, fantastic pressure fighting. Second round takes a bit of a breather. I think he got taken down near the end of the first round and he didn't want it to happen again. But also, he might have been tired from trying to finish in the first round. And then in the third round, he gets to finish just a beautiful right straight as Tavares was circling on the fence. If you put the guy on the fence where he can't retreat, no one is good enough blocking punches, especially in 4-ounce gloves, that if you throw 3 or 4 punch combinations at them a couple of times, they won't get clipped with something big. Pressure is so seldom used well in this sport, but when you see it used well, you go, oh, that's just peak MMA. Renat Fakhrenadov versus Andreas Gustafsson. When Gustafsson's last fight happened, I watched it and I was going like, what is this sloppy bollocks? And then I checked the comments on the Reddit thread, which I often do, and people are going, oh, Swedish Marab. And I was like, oh, no. But man, Renat Fakhrenadov has had such a crap run recently of fights that he should have lost but somehow won on the cards, or scraped through with the draw, like against Zaleski. And he's looked so bad in the late going of fights. And he always starts swinging these straight arm blows and surprising people with the speed and power. But he always starts the same way. And then Andreas Gustafsson just runs at him and lets him clap him with those straight arm punches. There was a nice little inside low kick step back to Southpaw 1-2. But mainly, it was just Fakhrenadov doing what he normally does, swinging straight arm punches for the first minute. And then if you get past that, he normally shoots a takedown because he's getting tired. But Gustafsson fought like a wally. And then Sam Hughes versus Sean O'Bannon. I still think back to when Sean O'Bannon was coming to the UFC and I had to watch the like Irish MMA guys try and make her out to be a really good prospect. I mean, she still somehow won 2 fights in the UFC. 7 people have lost to her, which is crazy. But I was watching her in this fight. She's getting taken down. She's got Paddy Houlihan in her corner, who's a good grappler. Like, that's how he made his career. But she's getting taken down, opening her guard and immediately getting stacked to side control, which is, it wasn't like a proper pass even. The girl stood up, pushed her hips forward and fell into Sean O'Bannon's side control, or into side control on Sean O'Bannon. And then Sean O'Bannon might have been worried about elbows from the top of side control, but they're like a small, annoying thing, especially in like the women's divisions where no one's going to haul off and crack you. And she's bringing her arm up behind her head to like lock that arm in, to lock Hughes to her. But that arm is the one that stops her mounting you or mounted crucifixing you. So yeah, she just kept getting like mounted crucifix, mounted, beaten up, and then got rear naked choked in the second round. Just her grappling looked bad. And she's supposed to be a striker. She does like the side on taekwondo-y, side kicky stuff. But she moves like she's covered in treacle. I saw someone say Sam Hughes is going to get into the top 15 just by smashing prospects who shouldn't be prospects. Her last 3 she's been an underdog in and won. So yeah, not a bad night of fights, I would say. Pretty bloody fun. Even the William Gomez fight was pretty fun. So yeah, more French events. But then if they did more of them, they'd try even less. So it's very weird that we got Tom Aspinall versus Cyril Gane and we're doing it in Abu Dhabi. just do Britain or France. You're constantly saying how much you love those places and you want to take more events there. But I will say, good on the French, because perhaps it's their propensity to riot over almost anything, but they get their event on their time. We have world champions fighting at 4 a.m. when they come to the UK. Disgraceful. Never been more special relationship cucked than that. Having our world title fight on US time. Anyway, if you want to hear about Hussein Keita in advance of his possible next fight, I wrote an article on the Patreon for it. If not, I think I'm going to do something film study this week. Maybe on Felix Klinkhammer, because I'm looking at interesting prospects. They got to be weird. I don't want to just. I don't want random mountain men who just cage maul you. I want weirdos. I can go and watch is it ACA or ACB? The Russian one where everyone is like twice as wide as they are tall because they just like it's their drug testing, but you have to be on drugs. If you're not, they kick you out. I could watch that for that, but I'm not gonna. On the side note, while we're just larking about mountain men and drug testing, do you see Marina Moreau's got a year for meldonium? Meldonium that when Islam Makachev took it, I was told it's not a big deal. But when Marina Moreau's does, Jesus Christ, a year out of your career. I mean, I'm not a Marina Moreau's fan by any means. I don't even remember the last time she fought. But it fits with the UFC's current drug testing system, which is the only people who are ever caught are undercard fighters who you haven't seen in a while. Never caught a main card fighter except Khalil Roundtree, who then they sentenced to a suspension that finished the week they needed him to fight Alex Pereira anyway. What a joke. Anyway, I'm your boy Jack Slag, you're my boy, and I will catch you later in the week if you're a Patreon boy. And next week if you're not. The great Marcel Sedan bless.